Let's talk about the age of the Renaissance. So where did the Renaissance originate? It originated in the Italian peninsula, and there were several factors that made Italy the prime location. The first of these was trade. Italy had a great trading system with other countries, especially due to its location. They were set on the sea, and as a peninsula, they had great access to trading and spreading of information. They also didn't have the issues with feudalism as many other nations in Europe were having at the time. And finally, they had money from banking, specifically in Florence, with family like the Medicis, who really had the money to invest in the art and intellectual movements. During the Renaissance, Italy was still ununified states such as Florence and Rome, and these states had their own separate leaders for the cities. However, they did not get along. They did not know how to cooperate with each other, and they were definitely not one unified Italian state. The only time they would cooperate is if they found that there was an issue with the balance of power among the states. They simply worked together in order to bring back the balance of power to ensure that all states had equal amounts of power and none were overpassing the others. This disunity became a problem, especially in the face of foreign invaders, such as France in 1494 when Charles VII invaded Italy. The states were not unified, and so they had no means of protecting themselves as a unit. This, of course, caused chaos in Italy and even was an invasion of Rome. Now, the idea of the Renaissance became with a man named Petrarch, and he is known as the father of the Renaissance. He labeled the period before the Renaissance as the Dark Ages, and then this new age became a golden age, known as the Renaissance. The Renaissance is rebirth and a golden age of intellectual achievement. The rebirth coming from the revitalization of classical ideas, and the golden age reflecting the new ways of learning and intellectual movements during the Renaissance. Among the intellectual movements are the isms, first of which being individualism. This was the focus on an individual as a single person and their own quest for glory. This was in contrast to the ideas before of a common Christian unity. However, this is now moving towards a personal quest for glory and one's own potential. The next ism is humanism, and this is the new learning. This went a lot with the fact that many scholars were now turning towards the classics of Greek and Rome in order to further their learning. There was great belief in the potential of people to achieve greatness on their own. However, all this learning was still coupled with the ideas of their Christian morality. During this time, the idea of sending someone money but then charging them interest when they return the money, usury, was deemed okay during the Renaissance, whereas before the church condemned it. This went along with people finding ways to earn money. Even in literature, people could see the growing temptations and worldly societies, such as in the Decameron by Boccaccio. Many of these worldly societies were ideas that should have been condemned by the church, but now were becoming more popular during this Renaissance time, and many artists were just referring back to old authors in order to justify their ideas. As was mentioned, the Catholic Church should have condemned all of the actions of the worldly society. However, they actually encouraged it. There was a process of beautifying Rome, such as redoing St. Peter's Basilica. The Catholic Church had a lot of money, and so they were able to be a major patron of the arts. Now, as one would see secularism growing, there was still great religious feeling. Many of the paintings that the Catholic Church commissioned were indeed religious paintings, and so many of the artwork of the time still reflects that idea. As many of the wealthy commissioned the art, it became a symbol of status and influence. When one went to a house and they saw the art, they could tell of the influence of the individual by the art. The Renaissance center was initially Florence, but moved to Rome during the High Renaissance. Art also began to shift as individuals and other groups of patrons began buying art. In contrast to the eras before, people were now spending money on art rather than war. Art itself was shifting as portraits became popular, a good reflection of the rise of individualism in the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, books like The Courtier by Castiglione taught men how to be gentlemen, which taught them morality in the form of education. Women were now receiving education very similar, if not equal, to boys. One notable woman being Laura Serreta, a humanist. She believed in women's potential to achieve glory. However, she wrote about the struggles of education and marriage, being that women had to choose one or the other. And with education in that society, men believed that women lost their feminine qualities. Another notable author was Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince. It illustrated his views on what was a good leader, mainly that the leader increased his influence and power, no matter the means he used to achieve them. This went against medieval ideas of Christian morality in leaders. Getting more specific in the Renaissance to the Northern Renaissance, it was very similar to the general Renaissance. However, there was a greater emphasis on Christian morality. These Northern humanists were more influenced by these ideals and generally believed that people were born good. For example, Thomas More, who wrote Utopia, believed that institutions were bad and led to the corruption of society, not necessarily the people. Erasmus from Rotterdam translated the New Testament into Greek. He believed that more people should be able to read the New Testament. In general, the Northern Renaissance was less influenced by the classics as Rome and Florence were. As for the lasting impact of the Renaissance, individualism and humanism were the main ideas and philosophies of this era. Although women could be educated the same as boys, their status in general went down, especially in the higher classes. The secular society that was thriving under the Renaissance would lay the foundations for later movements. People began spending their money on art rather than weapons for war. And of course, the artistic impact can still be seen in later artists today. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new or had a good review for your test.